Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. Please, if you haven't already, help yourselves to a Epic's baseball cap, some popcorn, because we're going to talk about movies. So what better to have to snack on than popcorn? So yeah, I'm not going to bore you with the details of my career. You stick around long enough, it seems like it's forever, which I think it has been. I think it's on the little card, so read it if you need to take a nap. I approached this assignment with the same rigor, discipline, and deep thought I usually reserve for something as serious of purpose as perusing the new releases section of Netflix. What interests me? But since this is a media-savvy group made up largely of women, and thank you guys for coming, I'd like to think we have some shared interests. So hopefully the topic I've selected will be at least mildly engaging. Given my position at Epic's, you might guess that I'm a fan of movies. And as a board member of the T. Howard Foundation for almost 15 years, you'd probably also guess that diversity is another topic near and dear to me. Combining these two areas of interest, I thought I'd use this opportunity to talk about diversity in film, and in particular, representation of women in Hollywood movies, or rather, the underrepresentation, on screen and off. What caught my eye on this subject was an article in the New York Times a few weeks ago titled, "Look Who's Still Talking the Most in Movies, White Men." Now, I have nothing against white men as a genre. I'm married to one, and I'm the offspring of another. But there's a whole range of people in our society, and somehow they're marginalized by being given limited space or excluded entirely. As I'll get into in more detail, women are grossly underrepresented on screen in movies. And behind the camera, it's just as bad or worse. Only 21% of producers are women. 13% are writers, a mere 4% are directors, and fewer than 2% are composers. In Academy Awards history, 1% of the Best Director nominees have been women. There are comparable statistics for Blacks, Asians, Latinos, LGBT and disabled people, as well as young versus older characters, and stereotypes of a variety of categories, but I'm going to focus on women. And I'm generally going to limit my data and discussion to women on screen. Frankly, we wouldn't have enough time to talk about all the ways in which Hollywood is lacking when it comes to fairly representing the population in its portrayals or its employment. Think about some of the top box office films so far in 2017. The Fate of the Furious, Despicable Me, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Spider-Man Homecoming, the latest Pirates of the Caribbean installment, Dunkirk, Transformers The Last Night. Pretty much the first thing that comes to mind is the female stars in all of them, right? Yeah, not so much. Within the top grossing films so far this year, only two, Beauty and the Beast and Wonder Woman, have female protagonists. While it's huge to have a blockbuster movie about a woman superhero, is basing a story on a fairy tale or a comic book rather than a real-life woman beside the point? I don't think so. There have been several separate studies published on this subject over the past couple of years, with many of them analyzing up to 1,000 popular, recently released films. Here are some of the findings. The ratio of males to females in films is 2.3 to 1, with almost 5,000 male characters and just over 2,000 female ones. Fewer than 1/3 of speaking characters on screen in the past 9 years have been women, and 37,000 dialogues involving men involved men, while only 15,000 involved women. Additionally, in most cases, when a female character is removed from the film's narrative, the plot is not significantly disrupted, except apparently in horror movies, which often portray women as victims. Is that a way of saying that even when women get screen time, they're largely irrelevant? If so, think about the message that sends. There's another study that found even Disney princesses don't get to speak. In Frozen, male characters have 59% of the lines. In Mulan, the male dragon Mushu had 50% more lines than the heroine. Not to single out Disney, but it has some very interesting data. Of 30 Disney and Pixar movies analyzed, 21 had more than 60% male dialogue. 5 had roughly equal gender balance, and only 4 had a majority of female dialogue. Contrasting Disney's highest male dialogue films with its highest female dialogue films is also an interesting exercise. The top 3 Disney movies with the highest percentage of male dialogue were the original Jungle Book at 98%, Monsters, Inc. at 96%, and Toy Story at 93%. Whereas Sleeping Beauty is top for female dialogue, but well below at 69%, then Maleficent at 68%, and followed by the 2010 version of Alice in Wonderland at 65%. Again, I don't mean to focus on Disney, but another one of their properties, Star Wars, also has some very revealing data. In the original trilogy, female characters not named Princess Leia speak for a mere 63 seconds. Yes, that's over 3 movies. 386 minutes. In Star Wars, it's Luke's Aunt Beru who speaks for fewer than 30 seconds. In The Empire Strikes Back, the only woman with a voice is a random rebel officer, and her credit is other rebel officer. And in Return of the Jedi, Mon Mothma makes up the rest. And here's another shocking statistic. Even in films with male and female co-leads, male characters receive significantly more screen time, about 25%, compared to 16% for female characters. So, basically, even when men and women are both featured as leads in a film, male characters are far more prominent than the female ones. In fact, the male to female ratio today is about the same as it was in, wait for it, 1946. 18% of films have women as 2 of the top 3 speaking parts. That means that in 82% of films, the reverse is true. 2 of the top 3 speaking parts are given to men. When women do appear in films, they're often there just as eye candy. According to one study in 2014, 26% of female roles featured some nudity, compared to 9% of male roles, and 28% of women were in sexy attire, compared to 8% of male characters. But I'm happy to acknowledge that in a study 2 years earlier, they found there was some progress on this front, because in 2012, 31% of women had been shown partially nude, compared to 9% of men, and 32% of female characters had worn stereotypically sexy clothing, compared to 7% of men. So I guess we should be grateful for some progress on that front. Women on screen are typically portrayed very differently from men. For example, based on movies also released in 2014, male characters were more likely than female characters to have an unknown marital status. 59% of male characters compared to 46% of female characters had an unknown marital status. A higher proportion of male to female characters had an identifiable occupational status. 85% of male characters, but only 75% of female characters had an identifiable job or occupation. Plus, a substantially larger portion of male than female characters were seen in their work setting actually working. Male characters were more likely than females to be identified by a work-related role only, such as doctor or business executive, 61% of men versus 34% of women. In contrast, female characters were more likely than males to be identified only by a personal life-related role, such as wife or mother, 58% of women versus 31% of men. And this one is my favorite from this particular study. Overall, while 85% of speaking characters had an identifiable goal, female characters were more likely than males to have a pro-social goal. In fact, 89% of female characters, but only 77% of males had pro-social goals, such as supporting or helping others. On the other hand, male characters were more likely than females to have anti-social goals, such as engaging in criminal behavior or physical altercations. 23% of male characters, but only 11% of females had anti-social goals. So what's going on? Are the movies mansplaining? Do audiences want monologues? Sorry. I'd like to think that's not it, but I don't have the answers, and I'd love to explore some questions with you today based on all of this data. In doing the research for this talk, I learned that of the top 100 grossing movies in 2015, 29% of the lead characters were women. Amy Schumer, Melissa McCarthy, Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, and Anna Kendrick have all made significant inroads in the comedy and action genres, demonstrating that women, and especially funny women, are bankable in Hollywood. Yes, there's also Katniss in the Hunger Games franchise, Bella in the Twilight Saga series, Rey in Star Wars The Force Awakens, which, by the way, was the highest grossing movie of 2015 with $742 million at the box office. And there's the aforementioned Beauty and the Beast and Wonder Woman at $1.3 billion and $800 million, respectively, to date. Maleficent with Angelina Jolie, which earned about $760 million, and Gravity, grossing $716 million, although even in a movie about a woman navigating space by herself, men had 54% of the dialogue. And I think George Clooney's dead character, sorry if that's a spoiler, had more to say than Sandra Bullock's surviving one. In recent years, on average, when a movie has a female lead, it makes considerably more money than those with male leads. Just shy of $90 million for movies with female leads, compared to about $76 million for ones with male leads. But keep in mind that the sample size of female-led movies is much smaller. So on an apples-to-apples basis, that means movies led by women grossed about 16% more than movies led by men, on average. Further, films featuring male and female co-leads, as I was talking about before a little bit, earned an average of over $108 million each, 23.5% more on average than films having a sole male or sole female lead. Interesting, the gender balance seems to be most popular with audiences. But regardless of these successes, Hollywood still doesn't get it. There doesn't seem to be an equal place for women and men in film. Okay, so I know it's stating the obvious to say that there are many, many factors at play in determining the box office revenue of a given film. And I won't posit that gender alone is the driver. But these numbers are pretty revealing. They certainly debunk the idea that female leads don't bring in revenue. Based on the numbers I've detailed, films with female leads actually earn more money than films with male leads, and casts with both male and female leads perform even better. The conclusion here is that gender balance in casting produces sound financial results. So why isn't there more of it? Does anyone here know the movies Thelma and Louise or A League of Their Own? These were two movies made in the 90s that broke the mold of male buddy movies because they were both female buddy movies. They both did well at the box office, were critically acclaimed, and earned a bunch of awards. They were both seen as pretty groundbreaking successes. So guess what happened in their aftermath? Nothing. Well, maybe not nothing, but not enough. One thing that did happen was that women and men realized for probably the first time how rare it was to come out of the theater and feel excited and empowered by the women on screen. Audiences saw images of women in a way they hadn't previously witnessed. Katharine Hepburn may have been an important star in her day when Hollywood was discovering how to get audiences into theaters, but she was always foiled to a man. Spencer Tracy, Humphrey Bogart, Henry Fonda. Off-screen, she was outspoken, self-assured, and fiercely independent. And maybe it was for those reasons that she was almost reclusively private. So was that a pattern formed early in Hollywood and perpetuated? Or is it just a reflection of how our society has always been? Even blockbuster hits that are notable for their female stars, movies like Basic Instinct, Titanic, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Twister, Terminator 2, we can go back to Gone with the Wind, are all essentially male-dominated. But getting back to Thelma and Louise, I heard a great story about something that happened in production involving Geena Davis. She played Thelma in that movie, and she also starred in A League of Their Own. And by the way, since making both of those movies, Geena has become a force in gender equality in media. Geena tells of how Ridley Scott, the director of Thelma and Louise, wanted her to take off her top in one of the scenes. It was fairly early in her career, and she wasn't sure. Should she acquiesce to the artistic vision of this famous director, or should she hold to her principles? Would she be seen as a difficult-to-work-with diva, or would she be applauded as a beacon for other women? She grappled with it, and she struggled for a couple of days until she finally asked co-star and far more established actress Susan Sarandon for advice. Sarandon listened attentively while she was having lunch, and when Geena finished describing the dilemma, Susan looked up and shouted, "Hey Ridley, Gina's not taking her top off." And so the discussion ended. Now, if she had not pushed back, would it have changed anything? Who knows? But one of the takeaways I've always had from that anecdote is that women don't have to use sexuality or exposed body parts to be noticed on screen. Gina's character found her voice and raised it loudly. And in the process, she made a star out of this guy. So let's get back to the 26 years following that groundbreaking film. There have been several other female friendship or ensemble movies, such as The Banger Sisters in 2002, Baby Mama in 2008, Bridesmaids and The Help in 2011, Pitch Perfect in 2012, and Hidden Figures last year. But there are still huge disparities, and the women lag behind. There's another woman that comes to mind for its female lead and storyline, The Devil Wears Prada. Meryl Streep's portrayal of Miranda Priestley was amazingly complex. The movie took on issues of women in career, love, and friendship, and the power of each. But ultimately, one of the takeaways from that film is the negative impact of women's professional success on their romantic and friend relationships. Again, maybe not the best message to send about women. The romantic comedy genre is known as being more typically of the chick flick variety. But even there, women lag in the dialogue front, where on average, men have 58% of the lines. Take Pretty Woman, for example, where Julia Roberts had more dialogue than anyone else, although Richard Gere still got top billing. Regardless of Julia's lines, men had 52% of the dialogue in that movie overall because of the male supporting characters. Again, we've made some progress because today, in 22% of more recent films, women have had the largest amount of dialogue. But that means that 78% of the time, they don't. And while we're on the subject of gender equality in Hollywood, let's talk about pay. According to Forbes' recently compiled list of the top earners for 2017, the men totally outranked the women. The top 10 actors earned a cumulative $488.5 million, nearly 3 times the $172.5 million combined for the top 10 earning women. Emma Stone was this year's highest paid actress at $26 million, but that's well below Mark Wahlberg at $68 million. In fact, if you list her with the men, she's number 15, followed by Jennifer Aniston, Jennifer Lawrence, and then 3 other guys to round out the top 20. Unfortunately, these numbers are going in the wrong direction, at least compared to last year. Based on the same study by Forbes in 2016, Dwight Johnson was the highest paid actor that year, earning $64.5 million, and Jennifer Lawrence came in at the top with $46 million for the same period. But at least she earned 71%, 71% of The Rock's income, rather than the 38% that Emma Stone got this year compared to Marky Mark. And Jennifer Lawrence has been pretty vocal about these inequalities recently. She's given some interviews that talk more about her negotiating style compared with the boys. That might sound familiar to some people. I'm proud to point out that Epix is aware of the problems and working to help change things. We've been a longtime sponsor and supporter of the USC Annenberg Media Diversity Initiative with Dr. Stacy Smith, one of the contributors of some of the data I've been referring to. Now, as a movie channel, Epix can't control what the studios produce, but as we're creating some original programming, we're making sure we follow a different path than the one I've described. So while this talk isn't about TV or about Epix, I'd be remiss not to give a shout out to my employer and highlight some of Epix's on-air accomplishments in the gender diversity area. Therefore, I'm happy to say that last year we created a documentary called The 4%, Film's Gender Problem. And you can catch it on Epix On Demand, Dish or Sling, and get a sense of how Hollywood A-list talent views this exact issue. After season 1 of our first series, Berlin Station, we reviewed the cast, and we made a conscious decision to add more female talent, putting Ashley Judd and Keke Palmer in 2 leading roles for the upcoming season. Our last 3 comedy specials have spotlighted female comedians, Megan Mullally, Angela Johnson, and Wanda Sykes. And our last 3 documentaries also focused on women's stories and issues. Serena, in which tennis great and mom, Serena Williams, is profiled. Straight Curve, a documentary written and directed by Jenny McQuail and produced by Jessica Lewis, that brings attention to body image issues faced by women because of society's unrealistic expectations. And the upcoming Danica, directed by Hannah Storm, about Danica Patrick, a pioneer in the male-dominated world of race car driving. Now, we all size up our surroundings, whether it's on a date, at a party, or at a job interview. We want to feel comfortable. And if we don't see some representation of ourselves, we're probably not going to find that comfort level and may be dissuaded from engaging, quite possibly resulting in a cycle of static. Diversity is about counting the numbers, and inclusion is about being counted in the conversation. In both categories, the data show we're a long way from either. And while imagination is wonderful, reality steps in. We may be able to dream of a goal, but we get held back from aspiring to it because it seems unattainable based on history and experience. Today, on average, there are about 40 speaking characters in a movie. So if writers were to add just 5 female speaking roles per film, it would lead to equal representation of women and men on screen in just a couple of years. It's a small task, given that these could be inconsequential background characters. But so far, no one seems to be raising a hand to do it. I know I've thrown out a lot of data today. How do we use it to progress forward and make change happen? How do we see more characters like Erin Brockovich, Elle Woods, and Leanne Toohey? We remember them as serious, badass women. We cherish them because they're rare. And we look up to them because they're strong, independent characters in real-life situations who are not on screen merely to be the love interest or talk to their friends about the men in their lives. Simply put, by increasing the presence of women as leaders and role models on screen, content creators have the ability to move the ambitions and aspirations of girls and young women forward to more lofty goals. And they can influence how boys and young men see women in our society too. If it's normative, it's attainable. But if it's an aberration, regrettably, it's probably not. So, as a media industry force, let's all endeavor to do what we can to have art imitate life and vice versa. Thank you. So as I said, I hope you found that at least mildly engaging. Questions? I'm happy to have a discussion about this. As I said, I'd love to talk about ideas that anyone has for what we can do. Thoughts? Yes, please.
So you mentioned that money obviously isn't the motivating factor, and that roles for women and men equally were earning the most, but that wasn't causing anyone to go in that direction. So what can we as consumers of movies and media do to push this forward?
Right. That's absolutely, that's a key question. And I think the turnout for Wonder Woman, for example, the screenings for Wonder Woman, I mean, I don't know if, people know that, the night before the movie launched, girls and moms were lining up, and boys too. So, it's easy to say you vote with your feet, you vote with your wallet, but again, Hollywood's not necessarily listening. So I think it's just continuing to to go see those movies. I mean, Michelle, you mentioned a movie before that I hadn't heard of.
Hidden Figures?
No, not that one.
Gifted.
Gifted,
Yeah.
right. So I gather it's like a small film. It's not like a big, studio, or is it?
I don't know.
Anybody know the movie Gifted?
I've seen it, yeah.
Show of hands, so we can have a sense. All right, so about a fifth of the room, give or take, maybe a little less. Yeah, I mean, go see it. And myself included, I never heard of it. So, and I think the more, as I say, the more it becomes normative, the more it will be perpetuated. I hope. Yes, please.
So I'm a screenwriter, and I've written a couple of screenplays. And so my experience as a creative is that I've come up against readers who are young males in their 20s.
Mm-hmm.
I've come up against an industry that favors easy money, in that they would rather create a film about a best-selling book based on adaptations. And so just offering this out, there's so many other things in play. And so I found it interesting that the doctor was looking at dialogue, because one of the things they teach you early on when you're learning screenwriting, is that it's all about visual. And so I would be interested to know the screen time as well as dialogue. Because what a figure does in a visual medium has a great impact as well.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's interesting. I don't know that I saw in the research I did, and admittedly this wasn't a thesis. I mean, I wanted to be prepared, but but I don't remember seeing any studies on just screen time.
Yeah.
It was really, all of them seemed to focus on dialogue or, you know, sort of like credit stuff. But it was, yeah, that's interesting. So just even having more women on screen. Yeah. There's something called, are you familiar with the Bechdel test? Does anyone know the Bechdel test? Again, show of hands, just so I can have a sense. Yeah, so very few. Yeah. So there are like 3 criteria, right? It's, does the film have 2 or more women, right? And if the answer is no, it immediately fails, right? Do they talk about something other than a man? Is that it, right? And what's the third one?
Do they have names?
Yeah.
Do they have names? Yeah, right. Do they have, like other rebel officer? That would, you know. Yeah. Right. So, yeah. So even that, I mean, there's awareness, and I guess, you know, like a lot of other things in life, and a lot of things, frankly, revolving around diversity. Awareness is the first step. It may seem like a small step, but we build on it, and maybe that goes to the, you know, to the consumer issue too. Start with awareness, build it. There's one thing that I read. This one was interesting. I have some of this with me. This one was, it was an article about, here, it's this one. It was in, I don't remember what, it's by a woman named Soraya Chamali. And the title is 20 Facts Everyone Should Know About Gender Bias in Movies. And her, I think this is the one. It says, yep, it lists the 20 facts, and it says, read them and weep, and then share widely. So it's, and you know, and also to your point about who's reviewing your scripts, you know, people write about what they know. So you're, as a woman, I imagine, and that was also some of the findings, that movies that were written or directed or both by women tended to have an awareness, and maybe a little bit more in some cases, though not all. You know, they were on the other edge of the test. But who's reviewing the scripts? And you know, again, just because I have to give another plug to Epics, in the 4%, which I encourage everyone to watch, there's a lot of discussion by, you know, and as I said in the talk, Hollywood A-listers who say, you know, it's a perpetual cycle, because these women are told, as talented as they may be, well, you don't have these credits. You know, you haven't done as much as these guys, so we're going to hire the guy, and then they don't get the experience, and then they don't have the credits, and it just sort of perpetuates itself. So other thoughts, questions? Yes, please.
I was going to say, I know in a lot of industries, you know, a service provider may kind of promote certain standards from their vendors from the outside. Are there any opportunities for you as Epics? I know that you're doing things internally, but to say to the movie studios, you know, we want these types of movies, and so kind of build it into the contracts that, you know, you do when you're doing your negotiations with them?
Not to date, but we are now, so previously we were owned by 3 companies, Viacom, Lionsgate, and MGM, and we're now wholly owned by MGM. And since they're you know, obviously a huge movie and television producer, it's a good opportunity. So, don't know, but stay tuned. So, of course, you know, Idris, not Idris, yeah, I'm lobbying for Idris, but Daniel Craig was recast as Bond, but, you know, is there going to be a female Bond?
Would you talk just kind of about your reflections, you know, the movie industry, we all work in the media industry, your reflections on how over the last 20 years progress has been made for women in the industry in general versus just in Hollywood? That's
a great question, and I think in television, both on screen and off, there has been tremendous progress. And yes, because I'm, something of a dinosaur, and have been in this industry a long time, I've seen some of that progress. I've been the recipient, I could, would say, of some of that progress. There was a conscious effort, and not only for women, but diversity in general. Now that's, actually I would say that's, I was thinking off screen, but on screen too. I think TV has been much better and much more advanced on this issue. I don't know why, other than it's been the conscious decision of the people who are in the industry to make that progression. So yeah, and I think it's it's nice to see that. It's nice to see that the industry, at least this part of the industry that we're in, the TV side, not necessarily the movie side, that the TV side looks, often at least, like a reflection of the country and society in which we live. Other thoughts, questions? Come on. Yes, please.
I'll throw this out as a creative, because I had a friend and she didn't really understand copyright issues. And she had a good deal of money though, but so she's like, Diane, can you just please do a rewrite of I Dream of Jeannie? Because it's so wholesome and it's so, cute. And I was trying to tell her, well, that doesn't really work. And so what I found for myself is, as I was writing this, it was more of a woman who was from 2,000 years ago, and she's dealing with, a metrosexual male, kind of like pajama boy with a hipster, and so exploring that. And so it didn't really turn out the way she liked it, but that goes to the consumer-driven content.
Yeah.
Suddenly, you're dealing with creativity and original ideas, and then, well, let's diversify. And for me as a woman, it's not hard to put, I've already got a couple of screenplays where it's all women-driven, and it's action. But I get concerned where there are men, producers and directors that are like, oh, this is a male character, let's just make it a woman. And it's like, no, there's more to, let's just switch anatomy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So it's interesting, I wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting point. And sometimes, it's sort of, I would almost take the opposite view, that sometimes just changing, I wouldn't say the anatomy per se, but changing the point of view, right? Making it a woman instead of a man just has, gives it a different gloss.
More empowering.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there was a show, so back in my Viacom years, there was a show called The Adventures of Shelby Woo, I think. Does anybody remember that show? Something like that. I may be butchering the title a little bit. But that was a show that was written, it was like a, made for kids. It was Nickelodeon, a detective kind of story. And it was originally written where the protagonist was a boy. And it was changed to a girl because the head of Nickelodeon at the time said, this should be a girl. And he was a guy, actually. It's a great show. It was a great show for women. It, for little girls. It gave that message, and it really was just that one tweet. Yeah. Yes, please.
So I saw that you used to work at BBC, so I wanted to get an idea of what differences do you see in how female stars are portrayed in America versus British-produced film and TV?
It's a good question. I can speak less about British movies than I can about British TV. So take that with a, yeah. And in fact, part of that is not only, sort of what I tend to go see, but it's the Hollywood influence, right? I mean, Hollywood films are universal, whereas British films tend to maybe be a little more sort of quirky or more limited in their appeal. So, but that's maybe my own ignorance too. But from a TV perspective, I don't think, and again, maybe this goes to my comment before, that TV is generally better anyway. So I don't think that there's as much of an issue in British TV as I've described in American movies. It's not apples to apples. You know, for what it's worth, BBC just cast the first female Doctor Who, which is a very big deal. So that's, you know, I'll give shout out to my current employers, my former employers, anybody. Anyone else? Yes, please.
Who are some of your favorite female leads in Hollywood and TV?
My favorite female leads in Hollywood and TV?
Fictional characters or whoever.
Okay, so let's see, Peggy and Mad Men, Thelma and Louise, who are some others? Yeah, I hate questions where I have to be on the spot and, like, you know, go back into those memory banks. Well, you guys throw some out, and we can all play this one. Anybody? Yes, go ahead.
I think, like, for sure, one is Imperator Furiosa from Mad Max Fury Road.
Okay.
Super badass, saving, like, essentially all the women and, like, the community that she works for. And probably 11 from Stranger Things.
Okay.
Two, probably.
Good.
Leslie Knope.
Anyone else have?
Maleficent.
Maleficent?
It's
Okay.
the older generation coming up with younger together to help each other.
Yeah. Melissa Leo, I don't remember the character's name in The Fighter. I thought was just a real strong, I mean, I think she was more of a supporting role than a lead, which tells you something, but yeah. I have to think about that. I like that question. No one else? Other names? Come on, we're all consumers.
Viola Davis.
Yeah. Yeah. Margaret Houlihan, yeah. Yeah, she was. She was awesome. She was early awesome, too. Well, Mary Richards. Gotta love Mary Richards, right? Do you know who I'm talking about? I
CJ on The West Wing.
Yep.
That's actually an interesting one, and I don't know her last name. It's Jenny, who I believe is actually the movie Forrest Gump is about her. And if you ever thought through that movie, that is a movie about Jenny, and she almost never speaks throughout the whole thing.
You're right.
Forrest never changes. She changes significantly. She is downtrodden, abused,
Yep.
drugs, horrible. When she has a child, that motherhood changes, and she thinks for the first time of herself and her son. That whole movie is about Jenny if you do feminist deconstruction of it, but she's very strong, and she changes without the help of a man unless she counts a little bit.
That's a great point. Thank you. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I think that's a great note to end on. So thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it.